If you're following along in your Pew Bible, that is the Old Testament, page 662. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light. As if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
All right, there I go. Okay. Put this in my pocket. Thank you, Deacon. And thank you, Michael, and Joey, and Lance, and choir. Oops. Got to get myself settled here. See, I knew that donut was a bad idea, y'all. We had donuts in our Sunday school class. I said, this is not a good idea. When I get hyper, I start talking a lot. Check the time. All right. The barriers that Christians often face in their life can be summed up in what I call the tale of two Williams. The first William wakes up and says to himself, I don't really need to pray. I'm good. I know Jesus. I've been to church. I'm good. And really all that spirit-filled stuff that Joe talks about, yeah, that's okay. That's nice and all on Sunday, but, we have to get going with our day. Have things to do, people to see, and other things that need to get done. I don't need to read the Bible. Don't need to pray. I am good. That first William goes through life and knows Jesus and maybe met him along the way, but somehow grew apart from the Lord. Like a married couple that continually bickers and finds themselves in a relationship that is cooling, and rather than growing together and learning to walk together, they grow apart. That first William seems to have grown apart, maybe went astray, doesn't really seem to take his relationship with Christ very seriously, and really on the surface of things, doesn't seem to have a relationship with Jesus at all. But then there's another William that I think about, and this William is a little bit more deceptive. He seems to be very, very spiritual, always at church, always checking the box, always getting his Sunday school pin and the stars, always doing the work that is asked of him, and always goes and worships, reads the Bible. And yet, his relationship is a little different. He believes that if he just prays hard enough, good things will happen. That if he says the wrong things and perhaps thinks the wrong things and goes outside, that lightning may strike. Always living, in the life of the church, but always a little fearful that perhaps he's just not worthy enough. He has to read one more book of the Bible. He has to memorize one more verse. He has to go through those particular motions. After all, Grandma did it. I need to do it too. He goes to Sunday school. He may even know a lot of the Bible, and yet all God is for him is an ATM machine. If he just does enough, then the money will just come out magically out of that little button after you press you put the card in. There's something about that second William, though it looks spiritual, rather than growing up with the Lord or growing close to the Lord, really never grew up at all. And his faith is very reminiscent, or perhaps a very innocent faith back when he was young, and for some reason, his understanding of what it meant to know Christ in his young age, just like pleasing his parents, having to please the Lord, just like doing the right thing in order for things to be fair, he sees the Lord and tries to make things fair so that those who deserve what they get what they get, and he who prays a lot and reads a lot will get the things that God has coming to him. You see, that first disciple, that first William has a faith that is cooled and really is no relationship at all, but that second one, that's a little bit more tricky. Rather than living into the complexity of life, he sees things so clearly, has all the solutions, knows all the answers, and yet continually lives with this undercurrent of fear and of guilt. It looks like a relationship from the surface, and indeed might be a relationship adequate. But is it a relationship that speaks to what God intends for us, or is it a relationship that is merely transactional? You see that second William, who sees God as transactional, sees things not necessarily with all its complexity, but rather sees God as one who is punitive, or one who blesses. Easy. Bible says it, I believe it, that's that. And God is one who judges. You know how you can tell you're talking to that second William? If that second William looks just like God, his understanding of God, by the way, he judges everyone. Quite legalistic. It's transactional. Somebody who views that relationship as transactional also confuses justice with fairness. People get what they get because that's what's fair. And I'm going to get mine because God is a fair God. That's what justice is. People don't work hard enough. They shouldn't get that I deserve. People have to earn it. People have to look like me and talk like me in order to have my respect or have my love or have a sense of worth and value in my life. That is what's fair. It's awfully transactional. And people who have that transactional relationship, like that second William, treat rituals and nostalgia like something that is more valuable than the actual relationship with the Lord. They do things because mother or grandmother has always done things. I mean, you ever heard about that one time that Dr. Carter decided not to do the doxology? Oh boy, watch out. You thought the church was going to fall apart just because we didn't sing the doxology. But just imagine how many Christians are more emotionally invested in their nostalgia and in their rituals than in their relationship with Jesus. These are the very Christians that not only are emotionally tied to those things of nostalgia, not seeing the way that God is moving in their life, but tend to, according to the researchers, gravitate towards those authority figures that can tell them what to do and give them easy answers and make things black and white. 9 ways to better your marriage, 6 ways to increase your prayer, 5 ways to be prosperous in the life of faith. Seeking external authority figures, authoritarians. No wonder why a lot of churches that are growing in America are those churches with strong authoritarian autocratic pastors who tell people what to think and what to know and how to believe and what to do. It's out there, trust me. Last time I tried to tell somebody what to believe in this church, boy, oh boy, did I get an earful. And yet, even among us, we do have, at times, a tale of those 2 Williams. The kind of William that has grown apart, has grown up and has veered in their relationship with Christ, and those who have never grown up before. In the book of Amos, which we started last week, we find both Williams being addressed by Amos. The first William, Amos addresses very easily by repeating the phrase, "You have failed to turn to the Lord." Very easy, not a lot of words. You have failed to turn to the Lord. He says it over and over again. You have failed to turn to the Lord. They grow up and they grow apart from Christ, or from the Lord. But the second William, that takes up most of what Amos is talking about. The believer that might be so comfortable, that might have all of the answers and know all of the Bible stuff that you need to know, that they really never grow up in the first place. To walk into the midst of the complexities and the issues of life where they are being called. It's there that Amos rings out and resounds a new word for us. Now, something about Amos I ought to say. Just to remind you, last week we started Amos, and I just wanted to remind you this couple of things that really caught our attention last week. One, you remember Amos was not a prophet, but a shepherd. And God called Amos out of the fields of Tekoa in order to preach as a shepherd, as a prophet to Israel, because the shepherds, the priests of Israel, failed to guide the people into doing and to being the very people that God wanted them to bring. The priests were so enamored with their life as usual. They're so enamored with sharing the power and the politics of the day with the state that they got lost and almost inseparable from doing their job of keeping God's people accountable to the Torah, the law. Now, some of y'all, when you hear the word Torah or law of the Old Testament, you think of those laws and all of those rules. In fact, for many of you, you probably might have grown up in a church where when the pastor talked about the laws of the Old Testament, it was spoken of negatively. All of those laws and all those rules. But one of the things you learn, if you ever plunge into reading the Bible and you don't skip Leviticus, but you read Leviticus, one of the things you learn about the Torah is it never intended to keep people bound up under a legalistic system. In fact, if you read the Torah, it is good news. It intends to free God's people up to be God's people, to have an authentic relationship with God, and to translate the holiness of God into their daily living so that they might be in right relationship with their neighbors as well. I mean, even the little laws that they have, like don't eat shellfish. We might think it's a little outdated, yes, but back then, that wasn't there to be a legalistic rule that imposed itself upon people. It was to protect them from being poisoned. You know, shellfish back then wasn't very good. We know how to cook it now, and we have better hygiene practices now. We're good. You can go out and get your crawdads later. But back then, God put that in the law to protect the people. You may think, it's very harsh on women, a lot of laws regarding women and their particular aspects of living. But again, God was protecting women in a world where women were treated first as property and second were neglected first and foremost. God raised up women under the law. God tells you how to treat the land, even how to care for the land. While the nations were ravaging the land with endless work and endless labor, God says, on the seventh day you rest, and every third year make your land rest as well. God knew something that we know now, that the soil needs rest. The land needs to lay fallow in order to rejuvenate itself. God's law, God's Torah, intended to create a holy space in which people related to God, related to one another, and related to their environment in a healthy way. And it was good news. And the shepherds, and eventually those in charge, neglected to follow a life under God's sovereignty that acknowledged God's goodness and God's blessing and God's grace. That's what Amos was about. Now, one of the other things I mentioned to you last week was that Amos is not very easy to preach. In fact, 4 months ago, if I knew that how much trouble I would have preaching it, I would have changed course and maybe done something else. But I always think that God has a reason for things. And last week when we preached Amos, it was a little complicated, a lot of history and all that. And so I went back to the drawing board and said, how can we preach this very difficult book, make it a little bit more uplifting, a little bit more concise, a little tighter in the argument, a little bit more simple? Well, I went through all of my books in my library, and I have these books in my library here in the office that have sermons by all kinds of people. And wouldn't you know that not one of those books, including my favorite Old Testament professor who passed away 3 weeks ago, Walter Bergman, not even he, there's not one sermon on the book of Amos. In fact, somebody this morning in the 8:30 service said, Joe, I've never ever heard, I've been coming to church my whole life, I've never heard of a sermon on Amos. And I said, you're on to something, because when I went to look in my library, not one sermon on Amos. So I am flying blind. What does this word have for us today? And one of the things I just kind of keep thinking of are those two Williams. You have the one William who has grown apart, okay? But it's really what I think Amos is getting at throughout his book are for those people of God who never grow up. They continually bring into their life that understanding of a transactional God in which their worship merely becomes reflective of nostalgia, in which their prayers fall flat because it doesn't translate into action, and in which their songs fall on deaf ears in the throne room of God because the songs themselves do not give voice to the needs and to the lament and the grief that we live in a broken world. We can come in here and have fancy lights and fancy music, like really big concert-like kind of an atmosphere. In fact, there are a lot of churches you can go to where it feels very much like a concert. I'm not downing that. We attended those churches within our Christian walk. But there are times at which we need to lament, in which we need to sing, "Let your hearts be broken for a world in need." Joe, we don't want to sing that. Come on, man. We have to work every day. We want to come to church. We want to feel good. Well, it is good, and we do want to feel good until you get to the point where you have built such a community that they fall on deaf ears, that you're pushing the marginalized to the sides, that you're practicing a way in which justice no longer dictates the way in which people are living in right relationship with each other. And I think God puts it this way: I so much hate, I despise your festivals. I loathe your sacrifices. Your songs, they are like a cacophony to me. They're just a jumble. They're a mess. And God gets to this place where he understands that if we never grow up in our faith, we will continue to do things like children do, which is me, give me more, because that's what children understand. That's how we kind of grow. We learn boundaries that way. We are policed by our parents. These are good things. We understand boundaries, but when we bring that into our faith and we're well on our way and walking with Christ, and we continually to neglect those around us, we continually neglect to grow up in our faith, to see that our relationship with God, with one another, is not transactional, but is based on Jesus' ethic of love, God's good news, then we start to realize and perhaps hear exactly what Amos is saying through his book. He says things like in chapter 5, verse 15, "Hate evil and love good, and establish justice at the gates." He says, give grief a chance. People, he says in one particular chapter, I think it's chapter 5 or 6 or 7, he says that the priests no longer give voice to the grief and the lament of the brokenness around them, and they have quieted the voices of the prophets. They no longer want to hear the word of God. John Patterson, of writing The Goodly Fellowship of the Prophets in the 1950s, says this: religion had assumed the form of a commercial racket. Think of this. Worship was a commercial racket, and men sought to control the deity in terms of a quid pro quo arrangement. The ritual had supplanted the moral. Worship was a commercial racket. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You do what you're expected to do, and God will bless you. We see the prosperity around us. Remember, Amos is speaking to a time of luxury and of want, and Amos brings a contrarian word that there is an expense, there is a cost to that kind of transactional living, and the people are paying the price, and they will be judged for it. Amos approaches the sacrifice in a way that reminds me of Walter Brueggemann, who I talked about a few minutes ago, in which Walter Brueggemann said that sacrifice during this time had become a code word for a well-managed religious system of quid pro quo costs and benefits. The New Testament, writing to the church communities in that burgeoning church growth, says it this way: let us not love in word or speech, but in truth and action. There's something about translating our faith, growing up in our faith, that recognizes that this relationship is not transactional. That, in the words of Walter Brueggemann, mercy refuses calculation. And that God works by a totally different system and totally different economy of what it means to live under his sovereignty. Amos seeks to give the people a vision of what that means. For one, he says that God is not defined by a transactional relationship, but rather defined by mercy. And it's that mercy that really knocks at the doors and really pushes the boundaries of this language. In Amos chapter 5, when you get to this harsh language of, I hate and I despise your festivals, that God gives the antidote to what is holding the people back, what is holding the people and keeping the people from growing up, and that is a release of justice. Let justice roll like waters. You can just get the sense that Amos is trying to open up the floodgates of justice. Another way of saying is, remember mercy. Remember that in God's economy, things don't work like the ways of the world. This is a kind of economy that Jesus says, where the first shall be last and the last shall be first. A kind of economy in which Jesus tells a story about a God who pays the laborer the same amount of money at the end of the day as he does of the one who worked all day long. It is a kind of mercy that defies the transactional relationship. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. No. It's a kind of relationship that says, I know that in some people's eyes, you may not be valuable. You may not be worthy. You may not produce, or you may not follow all of the rules that we've set up, but I love you anyway. A kind of God in which Jesus tells us not only to love God and love our neighbor, but to love our enemies and pray for our enemies. What kind of request is that? I mean, really. I remember a long time ago, about, 15 years ago, I was preaching on justice and from Isaiah, and I had a parishioner come to me, somebody I respected greatly, and we had a good relationship. And he said, you shouldn't use that word justice around here. Just fly around that word. You sound like a socialist. I said, socialist? Say, what? Well, then I did some digging, and I found out that one of his favorite talking heads on the news station said and told a lot of other people, that if your pastor talks about justice, run from the church. They're Marxists in disguise. Say, what? Really? So I told him, I said, dude, the word justice appears 3 times within the first 3 chapters of Isaiah alone. That's not me. That's God speaking. Then he started to say, well, things are just, you talk about things being fair, about, things that need to happen in order for things to be fair. And I said, stop there. I want you to go back and hear my sermon. Justice is rooted in God's way of doing business in the world. But you know what one word you'll never find in the Bible? You'll never find never find it used in the Old Testament. You'll never find it used in the New Testament. You know what that word is? Fair. Jesus never says things are fair. In fact, it's just the opposite. This is a Jesus who tells us the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, in which Lazarus, who solemnly stays by the gate, not picking himself up and getting a job, is the one who continually begs every day while the rich man sups festively at his table, and then after death, the circumstance is reversed, in which Lazarus finds himself at the table of Abraham, and the rich man finds himself in this place of depravity, hungering. And Abraham says, you've had it your whole life, but that whole time there was Lazarus at the door. Now things are reversed. We follow Jesus who ate in the house of a pretty well-to-do landowner, enough for a big banquet, and he tells the landowner, hey, next time you invite your friend, next time you have a party, invite the lame and the poor and the blind, people who can't pay you back. This is Jesus who tells us about a parable of this villainous son who goes to his father and pretty much wishes his father dead. Says, Dad, give me my inheritance. I'm ready to be done with you. And it's really a threat to wish him dead. Takes his inheritance, goes off to a foreign land and squanders it. He's starving, he's feeding the pigs, and he comes to his senses and he says, I'm starving here. My father has all this food in the world. I better start to practice my speech. I need to practice my speech because I need to make things right. It's transactional. I need to say the right things. Lo and behold, he goes back. What happens? He never has a chance to give the speech. His father runs out, throws his arms around him and kisses him, welcomes him into the household, and doesn't discipline him at all, but rather throws a party for him. Kills the fattened calf, gives him the best robe, the nicest ring, beautiful sandals, only to find out that his eldest son is out in the field. Father goes out to the field, and the eldest son says, I've been with you my whole life. I have never done anything wrong. I've never wished you dead. I've never asked for anything. I've worked tirelessly for you. And now your son, who squandered all your inheritance, came home, and you're giving him a party. Yep, life isn't fair. Let justice roll like waters. We used to have a guest speaker at my old church every year, Dr. Thomas Slater. He was one of my professors, and he would preach around Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. We'd always have a different voice come in during MLK and hear a voice from different communities. And I can never forget what he said. He said, justice isn't fair, but justice ought to look the same on both sides of the tracks. Justice is not fair, but it ought to look the same on both sides of the tracks. And that's the missing piece here in Amos. Justice did not look the same on both sides of the tracks. And the biggest thing is that here were a people who had denied justice to those who were on the margins, who had failed to give voice and to defend and to advocate for those who were pushed out or pushed aside or pushed down. They would come and worship, and God said, don't even waste your time. And it's there that Amos really tells them, grow up. Because worship ought to be defined at how much liberty and freedom we bring, not only to those who worship, but to those around us, to free the captives, to release those who are in bondage, to worship and to reflect and to sing about a God of Exodus who is still in the business of liberating and saving those who are enslaved and bringing them to a place in which they have a chance to be in right relationship with God and with their neighbor, and to live out the way that God calls them to live out. The freedom of what Amos is trying to get at here, let justice roll, is a call for liberation, to release the captains, bring release. I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship or in a circumstance where you tense up and you hold on to things. Perhaps there are things in your life that you're going through, circumstances or an ailment or an illness or even a relationship that is binding you up. And here God says, let justice roll, release it, surrender it to the Lord. Bring release. You know, I had to learn this with my children. I think we all do, right? Good to see you back, by the way, Harry. I had to learn this with my children. Eventually, you need to let them go. Well, I don't want to let them go. You know? What happens if they, do something dumb or get into a bind? There has to be a point where you release the children. But it's the same in our spirit. We need to release things. We need to let justice flow like waters. We need to push aside the many ways that, or the many barriers that we've placed in our life by keeping faith to the point where it really doesn't make a difference other than on Sunday mornings. A kind of faith that is mature enough to walk through the complexities of life in which we don't have all the answers, in which we don't know what to do all the time, but simply trust God, who is one that leads us into great freedom and who allows us to live not in an environment and culture of fear in which we fear God or fear others or fear the things that we might walk into, but rather in a position of joy and of freedom in which we have nothing to lose, and so we love and live generously. Can you imagine the freedom of not being bound to love everyone just for the simple fact that they're made in God's image, where you don't have to calculate whether or not a person is worthy of your love or calculate what's in this for me, or to go into a doctor's office and be the one person in that room with enough joy to say, how's your day today? Well, it's not too good. Well, it's not too good for me either, but I know Jesus. I'm not here alone. The Lord's with me. Or to be so free that when you go out, there's nothing to fear, and your prayers can be freed up to pray for both your allies and your enemies, to talk differently, to think differently, and to translate those words and that worship into action, where we actually make a difference in the world, in which so many people, so many aspects of our culture are saying, release me, release me. And the Christians should be the first ones to say, I release you. Let justice roll like waters. Let God's mercies flow. And may we love generously. And may we sing the songs that need to be sung, both the songs of praise and, yes, at times, the songs of lament and the brokenhearted, to give voice to the voiceless, and to simply let people within our own relationships and our own life to be free from the pressures and the expectations that we place on people. As you go into July 4th weekend, you're meeting with family, let your family be themselves. Don't try to police everything. Don't try to get them to believe in your side of the political aisle. You know it's futile anyway. It's going to lead to fights anyway. So you might as well just let it go. Yeah, I didn't hear that, but I'm sure it's funny, Susan. And we're getting to the point in the sermon where you're saying, Joe, let us go. Let us go. I get it. All right. I think, well, let's pray, and then we'll have the invitation.